Okay, Miles Alcoholic. So I got this approach to how to read the big book, how to study it, how to learn from it and apply it from my sponsor and his sponsor in the Detroit metro area. Um, there are a lot of meetings in this area that are structured this way. I've participated just as a participant in these book studies. I've learned from my sponsor as we've gone through the 12 steps together in this style. I've been at big book tables that are in this style. I've hosted big book meetings at my house, and I've worked with lots of sponsees where we go through the book basically this way. I'm making this recording to be able to pass that along. I know a lot of guys in the area who were not able to participate in big book studies that I've hosted, and obviously you can only work with so many people, right? So I've gone through this process a number of times, and I want to kind of like get it out there as a way of being useful to more and more people. Because I can only fit so many people in my house, I only have so much spare time. So the hope here is that I can simply pass along this style, this approach, these things that have been passed along to me, this additional big book commentary, the way that we pull information out of the book and apply it, the way we look things up, we explain, we add information, and like how that can shape a process of recovery. Um, Practicing the 12 steps starts with understanding them. The big book is a textbook, and anybody who has gotten certified for something in their life, for their job, knows the difference between learning book knowledge and applying it, right? Hands-on knowledge is different from studying for the test. Um, and that's especially true here in 12-step recovery. Self-knowledge is not enough for us. We learn that very clearly here. So simply studying the book is not going to be enough for us to get and stay sober. However, knowledge of the recovery program is required for knowing how to apply it. So that's why we study the book in this way, right? We're going to get a really thorough knowledge of what the 12-step recovery program is, where it comes from, how to apply it, and then we're going to directly apply it in our lives. Another thing worth noting, I'm going to be reading directly out of the book throughout this process, and I will try and make it easy for people to follow along, but because there's going to be so much stopping and starting, it's not something that you can listen to um, without the book in front of you. I'm going to stop, start, restart, add additional commentary, and for that reason, um, it will be a little bit confusing if you don't have the book in front of you. So I'm designing these recordings with the assumption that you're going to listen to it while following along in the text. Also, before I begin, I should say that uh, my sponsor and his sponsor, when we sit down with a new guy and we kind of have the conversation about what it means to have a sponsor-sponsee relationship, um, one of the things that we kind of iron out is, hey, listen, this is a time and energy and emotionally intensive process for me to be invested in your recovery in this way. And I will do that for you under the agreement that you're going to go ahead and do this with other people. So that we'll go through the book together, we'll go through the steps together under the condition that you go ahead and you do likewise with other men. So I want to kind of like put that condition on this recording as well. I'm going to go through this process for the sake of people who are going to continue to study the book, bring newcomers to book studies, bring newcomers to the solution found in the book and in the 12 steps, and kind of use this resource as a way of carrying that message forward, right? Like, you get to kind of like listen to what it sounds like to be at a big book study table, either one-on-one sponsor sponsee, because it's going to sound very similar to this, or in a step study private group in kind of like the Detroit tradition that I've gotten sober in, that I grew up in through my sponsor, his sponsor, various other big book tables at meetings and three-quarter houses in this area. Okay, so grab your books, grab your pens and highlighters. We are always going to do this with a copy of the Little Big Book Dictionary and Concordance handy. We're going to look up words as we go. The reason for that is twofold. Firstly, there's a lot of words in here that we probably don't know ourselves. And second off, when you go ahead and you take another newcomer through the book, he's probably not going to know a lot of these words as well. So you're going to want to write definitions down in the margins so you have them handy when you take somebody through the book. Okay. I start every one of these sessions off with a prayer. We do 3 deep breaths first. First breath in for body. Second for mind. Third for spirit. God, allow me to set aside everything I think I know about you and about the recovery process. Let me just be a channel for your peace, your inspiration, and your wisdom. Allow me to be guided by you. Allow those all around the world who are studying the book Alcoholics Anonymous and are learning how to apply that in their lives, that they get inspiration from you, that they get protection and guidance from you. I just ask that your light, your joy, and your direction come into my life and the lives of all alcoholics in need of further recovery. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, we're going to turn to the title page. That's where we start. Okay, it says Alcoholics Anonymous, big black letters. I'm using the 4th edition, published in 2001. Underneath the title page, Alcoholics Anonymous, underneath that title, it says, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered, ED, past tense, recovered from alcoholism. We start there, and I circle the word recovered because there's a lot of confusion and discussion in AA and 12-step recovery in general. Is it recovery, recovering? Do we ever be cured? Are we recovered? What do we mean by that? We can kind of start here by looking at the fact that when the book references that word, recover, recovery, it talks about past tense, recovered. Okay? So the question for us is, recovered from what and how? So that answer is going to be given to us directly. If we flip forward a couple pages to the forward to the 1st edition, that is XIII, a couple sentences down from the beginning of the first paragraph there, it says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Okay? Highlight, underline that, circle recovered. So we'll revisit that question of how we recover and what we're recovering from as we move forward. But it's important to keep in mind kind of how the language is being used and what it references specifically. There's some controversy in the AA community about how to use this word, like I'm not cured, this is an ongoing process. You might have heard that at a meeting. And so this recovered past tense thing is kind of a flashpoint for controversy and confusion. So we're just going to kind of like put a pin in that and pay attention to how the language is being used moving forward. Okay, let's flip to the preface. A couple introductory comments on the preface, like what this is. And as you kind of like flip through the next couple pages, you'll see preface, forward to the 1st edition, forward to the 2nd edition, forward to the 3rd edition, and forward to the 4th edition. Okay, so the preface and the forewords are going to kind of give us some backstory on like how the book got here and how it's changed over time, like what the origins of this thing is, and it's going to kind of place us in history, in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, the process of working out of the book, the process of pulling the program out of the book, and kind of like how the community and the text have changed and worked together over the years. So I said at the beginning, I'm working out of the 4th edition. So kind of we're going to get kind of like a picture of like the different editions and what the backstory is here on making this book in general, right? This book didn't just like fall out of the sky. People wrote this, and we're going to kind of like figure out how that happened, what they did, why they did it, when that happened. And we're going to get a picture of like what 12-step recovery looked like pre-book and post-book, right? Because obviously, in order for the book to be written about AA and how to work an AA program, there had to have been people before the book was here who kind of were figuring that out. So while we're doing this together, I think it's like helpful to place yourself in that kind of like history, right? What we're doing, sitting at a table, either across from another alcoholic or around a table with a group of alcoholics, trying to find recovery and learn from this basic text on how to achieve that, we're placed in a long line of recovery history going back to the 1930s and before. And I think it's helpful to kind of like imagine, what we're doing in somebody's living room, in somebody's dining room, out at a cafe, in the car, right? That this is from a long line of men and women who passed this information and this experience down from one alcoholic to another in a group setting, in private settings, at meetings, on the internet, right? And what we're doing right here, right now, is not an isolated event, right? We're participating in a kind of history and a tradition, and we have a lineage that goes back to the people who originally wrote this book and what their 12-step recovery community was like. And we'll get a sense that their community was not all that different from sitting around a table with a bunch of drunks trying to figure this out, right, which we're currently doing. And we're going to get a picture of that, and I think it's like helpful to kind of like relate what we're doing to what they did, and then also be impressed by how these people spread recovery and how they discovered how to communicate it, because they didn't have a book, they didn't have a meeting index, a central office, they didn't have Google Meetings near me, they didn't have a bunch of open talks on YouTube, right? All of these resources that we have now that make 12-step recovery unbelievably accessible to people, right? They didn't have that. So there's a little piece of like being impressed by, how did this start and how did they manage to communicate this to each other? I mean, think about back in the 1930s, it wasn't, there was no internet. So, yeah. So we'll have that in mind as we go through kind of like some early history stuff here. Okay. Let's turn back to the preface. It's page XI. All right, here we go. This is the 4th edition to the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off the press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. Because this book has become the basic text for our society, we should highlight that sentence and circle basic text. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, okay, so we can circle that, recovery. We'll kind of pay attention to how those different kind of tenses are used here. There exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Okay, define sentiment. So circle the word, draw a little line to the margin. We're going to write in the margin next to sentiment, feelings, opinions, beliefs, attitudes. Okay, that's the definition for sentiment. Feelings, opinions, beliefs, attitudes. Okay, rewinding. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Okay, what does that sentence mean? That means that this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, has kind of served as the backbone, the basic text, the textbook of AA. Okay? And this book has been the starting point for many, many millions of recoveries, successful recoveries around the world. For that reason, a lot of people who have heavy investment in this book, in this community, do not want to change very much about it. Okay, so that's that sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Okay, starting again with reading. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program, so we have recovery program here, has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. Okay, so the first portion of this volume, that we're going to refer to that as the first 164 pages. So around AA, we often talk about going through the 164. That's going to be this first section, okay? That's the thing that has stayed the same from edition to edition. There really haven't been any changes in it at all. But we're going to get a description in a couple paragraphs here of the second half of the book, which is composed of stories and kind of personal accounts of recovery. And they've kind of changed those around as the recovery community has changed, right? So this book was first published in the 30s. Modern AA community, the world has changed a lot, and so we're going to kind of talk about why, we keep some parts of the book the same, and we allow for some parts of the book to change. Okay? All right, rewinding, I'm going to reread this. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program, so that's the first 164 pages. Notice also when it says describing the AA recovery program, we're going to kind of have an open question for us of like, what is the program, right? We hear that around here a lot. We hear people say, I've been in and out of the program for years. We want to kind of pay attention to the word program, how it's used, and what it means in this context. And to be clear, the recovery program is the 12 steps and how to work them, right? Putting your ass in a chair at a meeting is not being in the program, right? Participating in the program, working the program, is putting those 12 steps into action, okay? And we'll hear more about that later. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. Benefactor. We'll circle that, draw a line to the margin, we'll get a definition. Someone who gives money or other help for a person or cause. Someone who gives money or other help for a person or cause. Okay, we'll see what that letter is by Dr. Silkworth in a couple pages. We'll read it together, and I'll get some added backstory. All right, next paragraph here. The second printing of the first edition added the appendix Spiritual Experience. Okay, so we're going to look at some appendixes. Spiritual Experience, which is still in our edition here, is 567. So flip to page 567 near the very back of the book. You'll see Spiritual Experience, you'll see Medical View of AA, kind of like some standalone little sections at the very back here. That's what we're talking about. We're getting a lay of the land, like what sections in the book are here. Okay, starting the paragraph again. The second printing of the first edition added the appendix Spiritual Experience. In the second edition, the appendices on AA tradition, the medical view, and religious view of AA, the Lasker Award, and information on how to contact AA were added, and the appendix on the Alcoholic Foundation was discontinued. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Remember, we talked about the split between the first 164 pages and kind of the second section, which is actually the bulk of the book, page-wise, is mostly personal stories. Okay, so kind of like flip to page 164. You can see our kind of like program description, the textbook section ends there on 164. And on the right, you see a page that's not numbered, but it has kind of like a section heading, Personal Stories, How 42 Alcoholics Recovered from Their Malady. Okay, and you can kind of like flip through briefly. Just want you to get a sense of like what's in here. Okay, you can see there's sections in here that have their own titles, and they're titles of like personal stories that individual alcoholics have written. They describe personal accounts of their own experiences in recovery. They're not a textbook in the same kind of way, where the first 164 pages are going to like describe what the program is, where it came from, how to work it, that kind of thing. That's more of like, honestly, kind of like if you didn't have a meeting to go meet somebody for them to give you a personal story, that kind of stuff is in here. Okay, that's like the personal story section. Okay, back to the preface. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. Okay, so here we have the first mention of Bill and Bob. Those are our two co-founders of the program. You're going to want to hang on to those names. We're going to talk about those guys a lot. So they have Bill's story, which is a personal story of Bill's experience before and after recovery, and Dr. Bob's nightmare, which is the same kind of thing. It's his personal story. Okay. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. Okay, so I know these paragraphs are a little hard to follow, but we're just getting a detailed explanation of what changed. So certain things changed from edition to edition, certain things stayed the same. So we kept Bill's story and Dr. Bob's, and Bill's story is actually going to be our page 1, chapter 1 in this edition. It was not that way in the first edition, but it is now. One small change happened that we'll talk about when we get to the doctor's opinion. But Bill's story kind of kicks off page 1 of our current edition, and then Dr. Bob's story, which is like his personal account, pre and post recovery, that kicks off the story section. Okay, So they're the two co-founders, and their personal stories begin the 164 and the story section. So we're kind of like getting a picture of how this book was put together, and stuff shifts from edition to edition, right? Okay, back to the preface here. In the third edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, They Lost Nearly All, 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added. This fourth edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of the personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I've felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. Okay, those last couple questions, and identifications there, I have a highlight and a box around that. That yes, that happened to me, or more important, up through the end. Okay, and that's kind of a advice on what the approach is to reading this, right? We're going to look for identification, right? The whole idea is if these people are describing a problem that I have too, and then they describe a solution to that problem, because we have the same problem, maybe the solution that they have to the problem can work for me, right? So we move from kind of like identifying with the problem to believing that it's possible that the solution described here is something that can work for my problem as well. First, I have to identify that we have a common problem. So that's that, yes, that happened to me. Yes, I've felt like that, right? But just staying there is only so helpful, right? Identifying with a fellow alcoholic is helpful, but if that's all we're doing is just saying like, yeah, I was all fucked up too, I was depressed too, there's not a real solution there, right? So first we identify, but we don't stay there. Hopefully from identification we can move to believing in and applying the program of recovery into our lives, right? So that's where we end up. Yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So we kind of want to keep in mind that process of identifying and believing in the solution and applying the solution all the way through this book. It's written kind of with the hopes that that's the reader's approach, right? And it just so happens for us as sober alcoholics, we're going to kind of want to keep that in mind when we do 12-step work, right? We're going to start by identifying with the newcomer, right? We're going to kind of meet him where he's at, and then we're going to try to propose a solution that he can believe in. You know, if it can work for me or work for him, it can work for me, right? Okay, forward to the first edition. Here we go. This is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. So remember, that's when the first AA book got printed. So when we kind of are hearing about the origins of the big book, we kind of want to imagine, put ourselves back in the 1930s America, right? We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Okay, so here it is. At the beginning of going through this today, we talked about what are we going to be recovered from? And here it is. We are going to be recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We got to underline that, okay? Now, I have a little drawing here at the top of my page that I use to illustrate to newcomers like what this hopeless state of mind and body is. This is how it makes sense to me, just briefly. I have at the top, I feel like shit, then kind of like a circular arrow drawn down to drugs and alcohol, and then a circular arrow up from that to I feel like shit. So there's a kind of like circle motion here. I feel bad. I use drugs and alcohol to make me feel better. It works for a little while. It eventually makes me feel worse, and then I'm back at the top of the circle, right? I feel bad. I don't know how to solve it except for drugs and alcohol. I move down to the bottom of the circle. It works for a little while. Then maybe even not only do I physically feel worse, but I do things that are fucked up. I treat people in fucked up ways. I end up losing money, hurting people, hurting myself, whatever, right? That makes me feel worse. I'm back at the top of the circle. I feel like shit. I don't have a solution for the problem of feeling as bad as I do. Now back to the bottom of the circle, right? And around I go. And that kind of like I have a problem and I have no solution for it is this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And we're going to talk about like once we've gone around that circle over and over again, eventually we get to a point where we can't imagine life with alcohol and we can't imagine life without it. And that's kind of the hopeless state of mind and body, right? So when we talk about having recovered, it means that now, as a sober alcoholic, I am not stuck in that circle, in that cycle anymore. It doesn't mean that I'm no longer an alcoholic. It means that I'm not stuck in a hopeless state of mind and body. Okay, so that's recovered past tense. It doesn't mean that I no longer have to go to meetings. It doesn't mean that I no longer have to work a program, right? What it means is because I have a program, because I work a program, I'm not in that circle cycle anymore. I'm not in a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Okay? So there's a non-recovered alcoholic and a recovered alcoholic. Hopefully that will help with this, like, is it, recovery, ongoing, right? Recovery is the process of, like, finding a solution to this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And we hope, if it's any kind of legitimate solution, that you once you work the solution, you will no longer have the problem on a daily basis, right? And the problem here is being stuck in a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, right? The problem is not having the condition of alcoholism, but it's being stuck in this fucked up cycle, this fucked up headspace, right? This fucked up habit of like, I feel terrible and I don't know how to fix it, right? That's the thing that we're going to get away from. That's the thing we're going to solve. We're going to institute a solution for it, right? If a solution is legitimate, it solves something, right? Okay. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. So remember, we highlight, underline, whatever, precisely how we have recovered. That's the point, okay? So that's like rewinding to those identification questions, right? It's like why they wrote the book is to tell you exactly how they've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, okay? When I first showed up here, I didn't know what this book was or what it was for. So it's like helpful when you're first going through it, right? We're paying attention to like, hey, this is why we wrote it. This is what it's for. Okay. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experience will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Underline that, very sick person. Okay, we're going to talk about we're not bad people getting good, we're sick people getting well, right? So we can write that in the margins. Not bad people getting good, sick people getting well. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on a occupation in such an event. Okay, here's an important point to clarify. A lot of new guys, myself included, thought that Alcoholics Anonymous, like what that meant was like even people at the group were not supposed to know like the full name of each other, right? And like when I would save people's name in my phone, it would be like Adam T, Josie S, it wouldn't be like their name, right? And I kind of like carried a lot of us newcomers carry this like I'm not supposed to like out anybody, whatever, right? This is not what that is saying, okay? So to be clear, going back to the beginning of this paragraph here, it is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals. Okay, so the point of the authors of this book remaining anonymous is because they didn't want a bunch of people to be like mailing them specifically and asking them specifically for help. Okay, they had their own jobs and they wanted this book to serve as a way of sending the message out into the world, but they didn't want themselves to be like completely overwhelmed with response to the book, right? Because they would probably have to quit their job to be like a full-time spokesperson, right? Which they're not going to do. So reading further, it says, being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on the occupations in such an event. So I couldn't keep my job if I was getting 1 million letters a day, right? We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. Okay, circle avocation, draw a line to the margin, we'll write the definition here. Not your main job. Not your main job. Okay, what does this mean? It means that working, carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is not their principal occupation. It's not their main job. Okay, it's something that they do in addition to their day job. For those of you who work full-time and have families, you know that you only have, a couple spare hours a week in order to do this. Some men and women around here are privileged to be retired, or the kind of like single bachelor, early AA guy can, throw himself into 10 meetings a week, whatever, right? Not everybody has that privilege. So their point here is we want to stay anonymous so that we're not totally overwhelmed in our time of being like the main sources of support for people who are reading this book. Okay. All right, moving on. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designing himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, so that means if you write a book or an article or blog post, omit your name. Okay, you get interviewed, you go, whatever, we omit our name. We instead refer to ourselves as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a couple reasons for that additionally. That's going to be, we don't want any one person to be kind of the public figurehead of this organization. Why might that be? Because if that person relapses, the public perception of Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be changed based on the public perception of that person. We want the principles of this program to stand alone on their own regardless of the personal lives of those who follow or don't follow, claim to be a part of or don't claim to be a part of this, right? Okay. Very earnestly we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. I have a highlight there. I wrote Tradition 7 in the margin. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. That's Tradition 3. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination. That's Tradition 6. Nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Okay. No dues or fees whatsoever. So remember, like, you've probably been to a meeting. Most of them around here have a little basket on the table, right? And it's, put $1 or $2 in the basket if you can. If not, you're more important than your money, right? These kind of policies are set down very early on in AA. Like, we're not doing this for financial gain. This is a non-professional thing. This is something that people do in their spare time, okay? Not for making a living. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced to work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, so we get this phrase, work with other alcoholics. Okay. Commenced work with other alcoholics. That doesn't mean day job, you guys are laying brick together, right? This means one alcoholic working with another, carrying the message of recovery in the 12 steps, passing the solution on to them. We're passing our experience, strength, and hope to the new guy. We're going to kind of take them through from identifying with us and kind of passing along what we did. That's what it means. Work with one alcoholic and another. So that's like what I'm going through here is an example of doing that. Okay, so we're going to get like that phrase, working, one alcoholic with another, many times in here. And when they use that phrase, we're kind of imagining sitting across the table from each other, we're going through the steps. We're going to be doing inventory, we're doing writing work together, we're going over our meds, we're listening to 4th and 5th, right? That's what that means, and obviously for those of you who are brand new, who don't know what all that stuff is, we will get to it. I think it's a good picture here. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Okay, so this is like really early AA in the 30s, preface to the first edition, that's 1939. This book gets published. The authors of the book want to be helpful to sober guys who have commenced to work with other alcoholics. So that's like sponsors, right, who are like going out and carrying the message. These early AA authors want to be a resource. So it's 1939. Picture like what that means, right? We want you to write a letter to us so we can kind of like pass along our experiences to you. So if you can imagine, right, you're buying this book, you're buying the first printing of this book, 1939. You get sober with the help of this book. You're going to go carry the message. What does that look like in 1930s America? You're probably going to go around your town. Maybe a guy, old drinking buddy, right? Maybe, your wife's friend heard that you got sober, her friend's husband, whatever, needs help. You're gonna go try to carry the message out of this book. You're just working with this printed volume. Okay, you might have some additional questions. We're in the place now where we have so much recovery around us that any kind of recovery-related question we have, we can probably grab somebody at a meeting, listen at a table, Google something, listen to recovery podcasts, whatever, right? Call our sponsor who lives near us, right? Get answers to those things. These guys couldn't do that in this like really early AA community. So they would mail a question to the original authors, okay? And there's like, remember we did the appendices, and it talked about, on the first page of the preface near the bottom, it says, the appendix on the Alcoholic Foundation was discontinued. So the Alcoholic Foundation, they have like, they set up like an office that could receive these letters, okay? And people would mail them, and the office was in New York, I believe. People would mail them letters and say like, hey, listen, I have this situation. I've been sober 3 months. I'm trying to, work with this guy. I don't have any wife and kids. He's got this problem with his wife and kids. I don't know what to tell him. I keep trying to do this, this, and this, but could you guys offer some advice? Like, how do I help this guy navigate this problem that I don't have any experience in, right? Whatever. You send a letter off, and maybe they write back to you, hey, we have a couple people in New York here who have a wife and kids, and like this is how they've navigated like this particular problem, so maybe pass that along to this guy. He can get in touch with these people. Here's their address. They're willing to work with him. Also for future, like if you run into, problems that you don't have personal experience with, this is what we recommend the approach, whatever. They're going to write a letter back. And you can kind of imagine this is, how early AA carrying the message was born. Okay. A lot of letter writing, a lot of traveling. Okay, that is the end of the forward to the first edition. I think we'll stop there as the beginning of our first session. Next time I will get into forward to the second, third, and fourth. And I think we will save the doctor's opinion for separate sessions after that. All right, thanks.